7 miles to freedom. I don't know if it was fate or just dumb luck that got me out of that German prison camp. Maybe both. What I do know is that 7 miles is nothing when you've got boots, a rifle, and a belly full of food. But when you're barefoot, starving, and being hunted like a wild animal, 7 miles is the longest road in the world. It started on a night colder than hell itself. The kind of cold that gets inside your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. The kind of cold that makes men lose hope. I was lying on the hard wooden bunk of Stalag 13D, my breath visible in the darkness, thinking about home. Kent's, Mom's cornbread, Dad's old Chevy. I could almost hear the radio playing in the kitchen when the idea came to me like a whisper in the dark. I had to run. Not tomorrow. Not when the weather got better. Not when the guards weren't watching. Tonight, I didn't have a map. Didn't have shoes either. The Krauts had taken those a week ago after I tried to steal an extra potato from the kitchen. But I still had one thing they hadn't managed to take from me. Desperation. The guards did their rounds like clockwork. 2 men, slow steps, cigarettes glowing in the dark. I counted the seconds between their shifts, listening to the rhythm of their boots crunching in the snow. I've been watching them for weeks, memorizing their patterns. They were lazy, tired, and cold, same as us, but they had coats and rifles and full bellies. I waited until the last possible second, until their footsteps faded into the distance. Then I moved. The barbed wire fence was only 50 feet from the barracks. Not far. But when you're sneaking across frozen ground with nothing but thin rags on your feet, 50 feet feels like a marathon. My breath came out in short, sharp bursts. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to move faster, but I knew better. If I made a sound, it was over. The fence was taller up close, covered in ice, the barbs glinting in the moonlight like jagged teeth. I reached up, wincing as the cold metal bit into my fingers. No choice but to climb. Halfway up, I heard it. A voice, sharp, German, angry. Then, the crack of a rifle shot. I didn't wait to see if they'd missed. I threw myself over the top, barbs tearing into my arms, my back, my legs. Pain flared hot and sudden, but there was no time for pain. The moment my feet hit the ground, I ran. Ran like hell. Behind me, the alarm blared. Footsteps. More gunfire. Shouts. The camp exploded into chaos, but I was already gone, vanishing into the black mouth of the forest. The first mile was pure adrenaline. The second mile was pain. By the third, I couldn't feel my feet anymore. The trees were thick, their bare branches reaching for me like skeletal fingers. Every step was agony. Ice had sliced open the soles of my feet, and I left a trail of blood in the snow like breadcrumbs. If the Germans had dogs, I was done for. I couldn't think about that. I had to keep moving. Somewhere ahead was the front line. The Americans. Freedom. But between me and salvation, there were miles of frozen wilderness, German patrols, and a body that was breaking down with every step. I told myself one thing. One step. Then another. Just 7 miles to freedom. The forest was an unholy mix of silence and noise, the kind that made a man question his own senses. The wind howled through the skeletal branches above me, but beneath that, there was another sound, the steady crunch of boots on snow. Not mine. The Germans were out there, hunting, listening, waiting for any sign of movement. I pressed my body against the frozen earth, my breath shallow, my heart hammering so hard I swore they could hear it. I didn't dare move, not yet. I had made it past the fence, past the first burst of gunfire, but that was the easy part. Now came the long game, the slow death of exposure and exhaustion, the real fight against an enemy I couldn't see but knew was closing in. Somewhere out there, not far from where I lay, shivering in the snow, men with rifles were searching for me. They weren't in a hurry. They knew the odds. No food, no shoes, no weapon, and nothing but miles of frozen wilderness ahead of me. I was already a dead man walking. All they had to do was be patient. I had seen it before. The lucky ones were shot quickly. The unlucky ones froze to death or were dragged back to camp, half dead, only to face something worse than a bullet. I wasn't going back. Time stretched thin, minutes like hours, my limbs stiffening as the cold wrapped around me like a second skin. But I couldn't stay there forever. I had to move. Slow, careful, 1 inch at a time. The first push off the ground sent a sharp pain through my body, my muscles clenching in protest, but I ignored it. Pain meant I was still alive. I crawled through the snow, my breath shallow, my fingers numb, my ears tuned to every sound around me. The trick to not getting caught was knowing when to move and when to stay put. The Germans were like wolves, tracking by instinct, searching for weakness. If I panicked, if I ran too soon, they'd hear me. If I waited too long, I'd freeze to death. There was no perfect plan, only survival, only the next step. By the time I made it deeper into the trees, the moon had shifted in the sky, dragging the long shadows of the branches with it. My body had gone past pain, past exhaustion, into something else entirely, a place where instinct took over, where thought became secondary to the one thing that mattered: keep moving. The snow-covered ground was uneven, treacherous, every step a gamble. My feet, torn and raw from the ice, barely felt the ground anymore, but I knew the damage was getting worse. The human body wasn't meant to walk barefoot on frozen earth, but there was no choice. Each step sent sharp, burning pain through me, but it was better than stopping. Stopping meant death. I told myself I had already made it too far to turn back. I told myself that I had survived worse. But the truth was, I had never known fear like this. A sound close, a branch snapping. I dropped low, my body pressed against the trunk of a tree, barely breathing. Through the thick shadows, I saw them. 3 of them, moving slow, careful, their rifles up, searching. Their breath came out in heavy clouds, their voices low, speaking in sharp, clipped German I couldn't understand but knew all too well. I had 2 choices. I could run. They would hear me, chase me, and I wouldn't get far. Or I could wait, hope they passed, hope the darkness kept me hidden. My heart pounded as I made my decision. I didn't move. I willed myself to become part of the tree, to disappear into the night itself. One of them turned, his flashlight cutting through the dark, the beam sweeping just inches from my face. I held my breath, counting the seconds, waiting for the shout, the gunfire. But the light moved on. The soldier cursed under his breath, shaking his head, and kept walking. The others followed. Their boots crunched against the snow, the sound growing softer, fading into the distance. I waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. Then I moved. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew better. I crept forward, slow, every step measured, listening for any sign that they might turn back. My body felt like it was made of ice, my hands raw and shaking, my breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. The night stretched on, endless, cruel. My body screamed for rest, but I ignored it. Sleep was a death sentence. If I closed my eyes now, I never opened them again. I had to keep moving. I had no idea how many miles I had gone, no idea how many were left. But I knew one thing. I wasn't stopping now. The night was a black void, swallowing everything, stretching time into something endless and cruel. My body was nothing but raw nerves and instinct now, moving through the frozen forest with the last shreds of strength I had left. My mind had become distant, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Just a voice in the background, whispering things I couldn't afford to listen to. I had lost count of the hours, the miles. My feet were beyond pain now, just blocks of frozen flesh attached to my legs, moving only because I forced them to. Every step sent a sharp jolt up my spine, but I welcomed it. Pain meant I was still alive. Pain meant I was still moving forward. But forward to what? That question had started creeping into my head more and more, an unwanted passenger hitching a ride in my exhausted brain. What if I was going in the wrong direction? What if the American lines were further than I thought? What if I collapsed out here in the cold, alone, just another nameless body lost in the war? No, I had to shake that thought. It was dangerous, deadly. My breath came in ragged gasps, curling in the air like smoke, vanishing into the night. My fingers had gone stiff, my hands clumsy and useless at my sides. The forest stretched in every direction, endless, quiet, hiding both salvation and death. Somewhere behind me, the Germans were still searching. I could feel it. The way the night felt heavier, the way the wind carried distant sounds, muffled voices, the occasional crack of a snapped branch, boots crunching in the snow. They were patient. They didn't have to rush. They thought time was on their side. I had to prove them wrong. Up ahead, the trees thinned, the dark shapes breaking apart into something new. I paused, squinting through the darkness, my breath frozen in my lungs. An open field. A frozen river. Something unnatural against the endless stretch of trees. I took a step forward, my legs trembling beneath me. Then another. And another. The trees gave way to a clearing, a vast open space covered in ice and untouched snow. And there, rising up like a ghost from the frozen ground, was a small wooden cabin. It looked abandoned. No smoke from the chimney, no footprints in the snow leading up to it. Just a dark, lonely shape in the middle of nowhere. I knew better than to trust appearances. Shelter could mean safety. It could also mean death. If the Germans had patrols sweeping the area, they'd check a place like this first. But if I stayed out here, I'd die for sure. I had a decision to make. The wind howled, cutting through me like a knife, sinking into the open wounds on my arms and feet. My body was shutting down, my limbs refusing to move the way they should. If I didn't get out of the cold soon, I wouldn't have to worry about the Germans finding me. The cold would finish the job for them. I moved. Slow, careful, my body a shaking mess of exhaustion and desperation. The snow swallowed the sound of my steps as I crept toward the cabin, every nerve on edge, every sense tuned to the darkness around me. The door was slightly ajar. I hesitated. Trap? Someone inside? I reached out, fingers barely working, and pushed it open just enough to see inside. Darkness. Silence. I stepped inside, my body tense, expecting a shout, a gunshot, something. Nothing. The air was stale, frozen. A single table, 2 chairs, a pile of firewood stacked neatly against the far wall. A small bed in the corner, covered in thin, moth-eaten blankets. Empty. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. I shoved the door closed behind me, my shaking hands fumbling with the latch. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cold wooden wall. For the first time since I ran, I was out of the wind. For the first time, I could breathe. But I wasn't safe yet. I couldn't stay here long. If the Germans were nearby, they'd check this place eventually. But I needed rest. Just a little. Just long enough to get some strength back to keep going. I pulled myself toward the pile of blankets, my body screaming in protest, my fingers barely strong enough to pull them over me. The moment the warmth, weak as it was, wrapped around me, my eyes started to close. Just a few minutes. Just enough to keep moving. I told myself I wouldn't sleep, but the darkness swallowed me whole. The dream came first. It wasn't a memory, not exactly. More like a half-formed thought, a whisper of something familiar, something I had lost a long time ago. Kent's home. The summer afternoon stretched wide across an open sky, golden fields swaying in the wind, the smell of fresh-cut grass. I was sitting on the porch, a glass of cold lemonade in my hand, the condensation running down my fingers. Dad was in the yard, fixing something on the truck, his voice carried by the wind, half a curse, half a joke. Then, just like that, it was gone. The sound that woke me was soft, too soft for gunfire, too sharp for the wind. Creak. A shift in the wood. The kind of noise a man makes when he thinks he's being quiet. I didn't move. My eyes were open now, my breath slow, steady, my fingers curled tight into the thin blanket. The air had changed. Warmer. Heavy. Someone else was in the cabin. I listened. The breathing wasn't mine. I tensed, every muscle coiled, my heartbeat a slow hammer in my chest. Whoever it was, they weren't moving. Standing still. Watching. I could smell them. Sweat. Leather. Smoke. A soldier. My stomach clenched. If he had a gun, I was finished. No fight, no escape, just a quick bullet to the head or a slow march back to the prison camp. Either way, I lost. But he hadn't shot me yet. Maybe he didn't know who I was. Maybe he wasn't sure if I was even alive. The old cabin groaned as he shifted his weight. I made my move. A sudden burst of motion, my body a raw nerve of instinct and desperation. I lunged, my shoulder colliding with his legs, knocking him off balance. The impact sent us both crashing to the floor, a mess of tangled limbs and gasping breath. He cursed, German. His hand went for his belt. A knife? I didn't think. My fingers found the splintered edge of a broken chair leg, and I swung, hard. The wood connected with his temple, a sickening crack, a sharp inhale of breath. His body jerked once, then went still. Silence. My own breath was the only sound now, ragged and sharp. My body shook as I pushed myself up, the dim light of dawn creeping through the cracks in the walls. The soldier lay sprawled on the floor, blood trickling from the wound at his temple. His chest rose and fell, slow, uneven. Alive, but unconscious. I had a choice. Finish it or run. I looked down at him, his face young, too young, his uniform stiff with dirt and sweat. I thought of all the men I had seen die. Friends, enemies, all the same in the end. I took his boots, his coat, his knife, and then I ran. The cold hit me like a slap, but I barely felt it. My feet, finally covered, finally free from the frozen ground, moved faster now, stronger. The coat smelled of sweat and smoke, too big for my frame, but it didn't matter. It was warm. The sun was rising, weak and pale, against the gray sky. A bad sign. Daylight meant visibility. Visibility meant death. I had to move. My body ached, my limbs stiff, my stomach a hollow pit of hunger. But the adrenaline pushed me forward, kept me upright, kept me running. The river came into view first, a thin ribbon of ice stretching across the landscape. Beyond it, the trees thinned, the land sloping down toward open fields, towards something distant. Smoke. Not from the Germans. This was different. Messy. Uncontrolled. American. My chest tightened. I was close. But close wasn't safe. A shout. Behind me. I turned, my pulse spiking, my breath catching in my throat. A single figure stood at the edge of the trees. Not the soldier from the cabin. Someone else. Rifle raised. German. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he fired. The shot missed, but just barely. A tree trunk exploded beside me, splinters flying. My body reacted before my mind did, legs moving, pushing me toward the river, toward the ice, toward freedom. Another shot. The ice cracked as I hit the surface, my feet slipping, sliding. I stumbled, caught myself, ran harder. The river groaned beneath me. I didn't stop, didn't look back. The gunfire faded. The ice held. And then, the other side. I stumbled, my legs buckling, my lungs on fire. My hands hit the snow, my body shaking, every muscle screaming. I looked up. A man stood there. American uniform. Rifle lowered. Eyes sharp, scanning me, uncertain. I tried to speak, but my voice came out broken, hoarse, barely a whisper. Hell, the soldier didn't move for a moment. Then he nodded. I was safe. 7 miles. I had made it.